So, and then I'll turn it off for you. Hello, welcome to our program today. It's nice to see all of you on this beautiful spring-like day. Our program today is on farming with draft horses, and we're fortunate to have our speaker, Dr. Reist, who is a recent graduate of veterinary school at Western University of Health Sciences in Pomona, California. She's currently a veterinarian at Gilbertsville Veterinary Hospital. Caitlin grew up on a farm in Lancaster, and her family has had draft horses, oxen, and currently has mules. Before Dr. Reist begins, I just want to say we have a very brief survey on the table. If you would please fill that out and drop that on the piano. It's just 2 questions, and that information will help us know where to publicize our programs. And we're also going to ask if you could hold your questions until after the program, and then our friends on Zoom and also people in the audience here can ask questions if they wish. So thank you very much, Dr. Reist, and I'm looking forward to your program.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Rice. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the Swinkfelder Library and Heritage Center for inviting me here today. Hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit about draft horses. I'll talk about other forms of draft animals like mules and oxen as well, and then go into some of the farm equipment and wagons too that draft horses pulled. You'll see lots of photos from the Fegley collection, as well as some here from the museum and some that I have taken personally as well. So I just wanted to introduce myself. Sarah introduced myself already. I grew up in Lancaster on a farm, a 60-acre farm. My grandfather was a history teacher and passed on his knowledge of history to my parents and myself and my siblings as well. So we have a deep passion for preserving our own history and the farm equipment as well. I went to the University of Findlay in Ohio for a Bachelor's of Science degree, and then I recently graduated from that school this May. So I don't have a degree in history, but definitely have a deep interest and passion. So hopefully I can share that with you today. So these are just a few objectives that I'll go over. I'll first talk about the different breeds of draft horses, the harness and equipment. It can be kind of complex, so if you have lots of questions, that's okay. And then, like I said, I'll talk about the farm implements and wagons that draft horses pulled, other draft animals like oxen and mules, and then I'll briefly touch on the difference between a mule and a horse, and then I'll take your questions, and if you have any experiences with draft horses, you can feel free to share that at the end as well. So I just want to give a brief equine history timeline. So this species is called Equus ferus. Scientists think that they were domesticated between like 3,500 to 2,500 BC. Some people say as early as 6,000 BC. It kind of depends on the area because they are domesticated in lots of different places around the world, but that's the general timeline. I included a few fun facts with in 680 BC is when the first chariots were allowed in the Olympic Games. And then there's a person called Xenophon, I'm thinking I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He wrote The Cavalry Commander, which is a book on horsemanship and kind of like the equestrians that we know of today. He was one of the founders. So you can see the timeline goes on before Christ. So horses have been around for many, many years. They were first used as food animals, like for milk and for meat, which we don't really think about today, even though some countries do have that. And then they were used in warfare, specifically like during the Middle Ages with the knights and armor. They were used for transportation as well as riding and hunting. You can see here I have a picture from the Reading Museum collection of an armor that would have went on a horse's face, which is kind of interesting. The first bits, a bit is something that goes in the horse's mouth, and that's connects to the reins or the lines, and that helps direct or steer the horses. They were first made out of wood, and now they're made out of metal. There are lots of different types of horses. They can be categorized into like two main different types: light horses, which is more of like a lighter bone type of horse, and draft horses, really heavier built for pulling. I'll briefly touch over those a little bit later. On the next slide, I wanted to show you, these are also from the Reading Museum collection of some general artifacts associated with horses. So in the middle, you can see the snaffle bit that would have went in the horse's mouth. The reins or the lines would have hooked to those little circles there on the, let me see if I can have the pointer right here. These rings would have held the lines to direct the horse. And then you can just see this the horse's muzzle here on the other far side. That was dated 1658. So just something that's kind of interesting and very intricate. So there are lots of different breeds of horses. They can be categorized into what we call the cold-blooded animals from the colder climates. These are mainly the draft horses, like the Percherons and Belgians and Clydesdales that we know of today. They're known for their weight bearing and really pulling lots of wagons, and for their strength and endurance. We have the hot-blooded animals or horses that come from the warmer climates. These are like the Arabian breeds, known for their speed, and they can also have known for their temperament as well. Not the best temperament, but it's okay. I'm trying to, there we go. And then the warm bloods are a mix of a little bit of both. So the cold-blooded breeds and then the hot-blooded breeds. These are most of the horses today that you might be familiar with, like the quarter horses, Tennessee walkers. They're used for riding and lighter work and dressage. So I want to go over what is a draft horse. So draft means to haul or to draw. There are lots of different breeds. The ones that were most commonly known here in the United States are the Clydesdales, Percherons, Belgians, Shires, and even Suffolks. And there are lots of other draft breeds that are in Europe as well, but these are the main ones that we're more familiar with here in the United States. They are very large animals. They're measured by a hand. So if you look at your hand, they're measured four inches to the hand. So you can go up like this, and then most of them around 16 to 18, even sometimes a little higher than that, hands high. You measure based off of the ground here all the way to the withers. So this is the withers where the crest of the neck comes down and the back forms. So you measure to that point, not to the ears where some people might think. And they weigh around a ton. Some are a little bit around a ton, some are a little bit more, depending on the specific breed of the draft horse. And like I mentioned, they're cold-blooded animals, so they come from the colder European countries, and they're used for pulling, farming, and weight bearing. Like I mentioned, these are the common breeds of draft horses that you can see. So you can see the Percheron there up on the top screen, the Belgian below it, the Clydesdale, the Shire, and then even a Suffolk, which is the least familiar breed. So now I'll talk a little bit about each of the different breeds of draft horses. I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I just wanted to give you kind of a history of where they originated from. So the Clydesdales originated in the Clyde Valley in Scotland. They were mainly used for mining horses in the coal mines. They were crossed between the English mares with a little heavier Flemish mares, or Flemish stallions, and the Flemish stallions are now now extinct. Their colors are bay and brown, which is the most common. They look very similar to the Shires, which I'll go over, but a little more finer feathering that you might see. Most commonly, most people know of the Anheuser-Busch Budweiser Clydesdales. You'll see them in marketing campaigns. Right now, in this picture, there are 8 horses hooked up to their wagon. And then the bottom picture is just a single horse. It doesn't have a pole, it has shafts. So you can see this piece of wood here on either side is connected to the harness of the horse. That's what that's what connects the horse to the wagon. The team that you see above here, they have a pole, so that connects the pole to the first two horses, and then they have spreaders, which I'll go in a little bit more detail later in the presentation, that connects the rest of the horses there. Percherons, the next breed, they were in Perche in France. In the 1780s, with the French Revolution, they were thought to become extinct, so they started to cross some Arabian stallions with them as well. They just weren't breeding as many because they had to focus more on the war. They're mainly black or gray. You might see a little dappling, which you can see kind of the spots there in these two older photographs. Most people think that the dappling is due to like nutrition and being conditioned very well. So you might see some of those spots come out. It also can relate to the genetics too. You'll see a few of these dates that I put in here, like 1850, they were brought to the United States. And like I said, they're used in warfare. They weren't as heavily built as they are today when they were used in warfare. They're a little lighter boned and not as heavy. And then they started after the warfare really focusing on how large they are and trying to get them a little heavier built to pull the carriages and coaches in France. And I found a source that said that they hooked and pulled omnibus, and an omnibus is like a taxi transferring people from like the different areas of the city. And then this is another hitch that I wasn't too familiar with until I started to do some research. It was a Heinz Percheron hitch. So like the Heinz ketchup and the pickles, they would transport their pickles in this large wagon and they would have Percherons. So similar to the Budweisers, but this is a Percheron hitch that they used in their commercials and for marketing. And they, like I said, went out of Pittsburgh. Here's another photograph of the wagon that they used. So we always think about the Budweisers, but there are other hitches, commercial hitches for sure. Now we'll talk a little bit about the Belgian horse. So the Belgian is originally known as a Flanders horse. It's mix of the Flemish horse, like I said, that's now extinct, and the Brabrants. Brabrants are still in European nations today and countries. They're a little bit smaller than the Belgians and a little bit less refined than the Belgians today. In 1903, Belgians were brought over here for the St. Louis World's Fair. There's a little bit of debate. Some people liked that, having them publicized. Some people didn't really like having them come over. But mainly the Belgians are also used for like plowing in fields. You'll see them really commonly in like the Lancaster area, hooked up to different implements. And they can be bay, chestnut, sorrel, or even roan. Here is one of our mares that we had. This is an older photograph, one of our Belgian mares, and then her foal here lying on the ground. And then Shires are another breed. They look very similar to the Clydesdale, so it is a little bit harder to know specifically just by looking at them, but they were developed in England. The specific origin of the breed is unknown. They're thinking more mixed breed, possibly with the Old English black horse. In the 1800s, they were imported to the United States. They're a little heavier than the Clydesdales, like I said, but if you put two and two beside each other, you might not really see the difference. So it can be hard to recognize. And then they have a little more of a coarser kind of hair or feathers near their hooves. And then the last breed I'll talk about are the Suffolks, which are probably the least common ones we don't really think about. They were developed in Norfolk and Suffolk, England. Their only color is chestnut. There's lots of different shades of chestnut, but like I said, they're the least known breed, mainly for plowing and pulling implements as well. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me with this, or should I move a little closer? Okay. And then the common misconception are the halflingers. Lots of people think that these are halflingers, 4 horses here hooked to a Conestoga wagon. Most people think that they're Belgians when they first take a look at them, but they aren't considered draft horses. They're a little bit smaller than the Belgians. They still do draft work, so they still can pull things and pull equipment, but they're a little lighter boned than the Belgians. So now we'll go over the harness and equipment, and it can get confusing for sure. There's lots of equipment that goes into pulling wagons and implements, but I'll briefly touch base on and go over kind of each parts of the equipment. You probably won't really understand it if you don't have a history or aren't used to working with horses, but I'll try to briefly summarize it for you and hopefully show some diagrams. That way you can understand it as well. But it does take practice. So putting the harness on and off the horse and kind of seeing how the pieces of the puzzle fit together is important and can be helpful. So you might not understand it today, but maybe if you get to see a draft horse in the harness and you can kind of take a look at it in person, you might get a better picture. This is Francis. He was our Belgian gelding, the last one that we bred and raised. We had to put him down a few years ago, but I wanted to include his picture here. So you can see he has bioplastic harness, which is used today. It's not a leather, but a very lightweight modern harness on. And this is a good example. I'll show some older photographs of the leather harness, but this is a good example to kind of go over the different parts. Here on the right-hand side, you can see he has his bridle on. This goes over top of the ears. It has blinders as well. And then there's a bit right here that goes in the mouth. The bit's the one that's controlling the movement of the horse. The lines will connect to this smaller hole right here on either side. Sometimes you'll see a bridle that doesn't have a blinders on, and it just depends based on the horse's temperament. Horses can see, they have peripheral vision, so they can see to the side. They can't see directly in front of them or directly behind them. So you might know it's not safe to stand directly behind them or directly in front of them. So the blinders help to keep them focused if they're driving, like especially the horse and buggies, and like Lancaster with the Amish, they'll have lots of blinders on so they don't get distracted by the cars or spooked easily. So you'll see the blinders here. Like I mentioned, the bits right here, this little chain is called a curb chain. It goes underneath the jaw and connects to the other side. We don't have it attached, but that's okay. We'll see the harness here. We have a collar, which we have lots of examples here as well. You can see the collar, and I'll go over that. I'll have lots of pictures of that too later on in the presentation. But there's a collar here, and a hames is a metal piece that fits in the groove of the collar. When the horse goes to pull, it pulls against the collar, and it uses its shoulder and neck to really pull into the load. So that's where once the horse takes off, it's really pulling against the collar. Let me show you a few label diagrams here. So like I mentioned, the blinders are here. The bit is what's controlling the horse, controlling the direction of where the horse is going. The collar is here. The hames are these metal pieces that fit in the groove of the collar. And that is lots of the rest of the equipment, and the harness is connected to the hames. We'll see a breast strap, which is very similar to right over here, which you can't see as well in this picture, but it connects the pole to the horse. So I'll show you some more pictures. Don't worry, this isn't the only one, but we'll see here's a belly band that goes around the horse, around the girth of the horse, and then the breeching surrounds the back side of the horse. So like I said, here is a little bit better of an image that you can see the collar. Each collar is specific to each horse. They do come in standard sizes, but you don't want that collar too loose, and you don't want it too tight for the horse, because like I said, that's what they're pulling against. Here are the hames, like I mentioned. They're pieces of metal. These here are wood. They used to be made out of wood, but now they're metal. This is the breast strap that will connect to the pole or the single tree of the wagon. And here's Cap and Tom. These are two perch run horses that we've had. You can see here just kind of how they're hooked up to the wagon. So this is a bobsled, and you can notice they have their bit right here in the mouth. Both of them have a bit. They have a driving line that connects the bit, and it's going all the way back through the hames, all the way back to the driver. So it's one single line, and then it splits off like a Y. The one side will go to Tom on his left, the other one will go to Cap on his left. And then the one single line goes back to the driver. You can see here, this is what I mentioned about the like the breast strap, or the like a hook right here that'll connect the single tree to the pole. And everything, like I said, connects to the collar and the hames. This strap goes all the way back here and connects to the wagon. These are called trace chains. So this, like I mentioned, is the bit. And there are the lines going all the way back to the lines, and the trace chains are there, and that's the breast strap. So here's a little bit better of an image that you can see from behind the wagon. This is the double tree right here. So one's going to one horse and the other's going to the other horse. These are the trace chains that's actually connecting the wagon and allowing the horse to pull. From the front side, I just kind of drew a diagram using these, the red dots. You can see where the lines cross. So like I said, one part of the reins are going to the one side of the horse's mouth, the other one's going to the other, and you'll see them cross in between. And then this is a picture just for comparison of the harness that we use today and the harness that was used in like the 1800s and early 1900s. Very, very similar. We have the collar here. We can see the hames, the wooden hames right here as well. The breast chain or strap is coming down the front, hooking to the single tree and connecting it to the pole of the wagon. And then we have the bridle here with the bit in itself, and then the lines are going back towards the driver. So not a whole lot has changed. I just wanted to kind of show a picture. We have it here in the room that you can take a look at after, but for those that are on Zoom, I wanted to show a picture of a collar and hames. So you can see the collars right here. It's made out of leather. On the back side, once you look around, there's like a cloth, and normally they stuff it with like horsehair or bristles to keep it padded for the horses. The breast chain you can see is this chain right down here. Like I said, that's what will connect it to the single tree of the pole. These are housings right here, a piece of leather that goes over top the collar and over top the hames to help protect it from the weather. So if it's raining outside, it won't get any moisture in between the collar and the horse. And then we can see the Conestoga team bells, the 3 bells right here. We can hear them ringing. Those connect to the hames, which are the pieces of wood. There's a small little iron hole that you can put them in. You can take a look at it after the presentation as well. So you'll see those. Sometimes they are marked with initials, and some of them are kind of decorative. If these were on a Conestoga team horses and they had to stop at like a tavern or stop overnight, you can imagine there are lots of other teamsters at the same tavern staying overnight, so they might get mixed up. So sometimes you'll see the initials on the housings as well. This is a collar that we have downstairs. You can take a look at it. It's just an example of what could be used on one of the, like a draft horse or even a buggy horse. This is from the Fisher's Harness Shop brochure. They make harness, and like I mentioned before, there are lots of different sizes to harness, and you want to make sure that the harness and the collar fits the horse specifically. This is how you measure the collar. And then here's another example of how you measure the collar. This is the breast chain, like I had mentioned earlier, connecting the horse to the single tree to the pole. This is a twisted link chain. Most of the women back in the days would make the chains rather than the men. And it's very, very intricate. We've had my brother's that does blacksmithing, and he's gone to international blacksmith conventions, and a lot of the blacksmiths don't know how they made the chains because it takes several links to be broken in order for the whole chain to break. So a very like a braided chain, very intricate.
That lost now.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then this right here is the spreader, what we call the spreader. So like I mentioned earlier, when I first did the, when I was first talking about like the Budweiser Clydesdales, how they have a tongue right here. My dad can get out the spreader for you, that way you can see it, those who are in the room. But this is what's going to connect the horses together. The pole only goes so far. The pole only goes for the first two horses, or the tongue of the pole. And these are what connect the remaining horses together. So you can see the double trees there, two on either side. And that's also twisted link. So you can see how it's braided together. Okay, then I'll go to the next one. Like I said, it can be very complicated. I wanted to show a video that I took of at the 20 Mule team in Boron, California. This you can see a good example of the spreader in between all of the mules. This is very long because it's a 20 Mule team. Most of them would only be six horses. But you can see that all the harness, the collars, the hames, the bridles. Probably moved a little too fast, but I wasn't expecting to show it to anyone, but I took the video. And then you can see the pole right here. So the pole is what will connect the two horses together, but you need the spreader to connect the remaining horses, however many you have, whether it's 6 or 8 or 20. And here's a few diagrams because, like I said, it gets very confusing. So if it's overwhelming right now, it's okay. I'm sure a lot of people are confused too. So I included a few pictures of driving 2 horses, 4 horses here, and 6 horses. So for 2 horses, you have the 2 lines, like I mentioned, they go split off. So that way they go on either side of the bit. If you're doing 4 horses, you'll have 4 lines because you need to connect the 2 in front of the wheel horses as well. So you'll have 4 lines. For the 6 horses, you'll have 6 lines. So you can see how they all cross over and all go to there as well, go to the horses' bits as well. This is just a picture of a team of mules. You can see how it crosses over the lines. Very brief video of them working. And then I have the next picture I have are just regular lines like I was talking about. You're holding 2 lines in your hands. They used to have what's called a jerk line to be hooked up to the Conestoga team horse. And my dad can show you that as well right here. It's a really long line. It'll get connected to the 2 horses out front, and that's what's controlling the horses. So rather than going to each of the mouths of the horses, it just goes to the one out front. And this was used a single line to control the horses. So normally today you'll say G to turn right, the horses will go right, Paul to turn left. In this case, the Conestoga teamsters would have it in their hands and they would do several short jerks, and that would indicate to the team to turn right. If they pulled really steady on the line, then they would know to turn left. So a little different than what we're used to today. Not too many people know how to drive with a jerk line. Not too many horses are trained with it. And then the most important is whoa, that means to stop. So that's the first command that the horses should learn. And now I'll talk a little bit about like the importance of draft horses, what you might see them be used today and throughout history. I'll have some older photographs as well as some newer photographs of some wagons. But like I said, they're mainly used for farm work, pulling machinery, harvesting crops, for horsepower, like the Hebner, the horse treads, for powering thrashers, doing timber or log work, delivering goods, lots of different types of services within the city as well. freight, like the Conestoga wagon, like I mentioned earlier. I'll touch a small amount on that as well. So hauling freight, and then transportation was also important. So here's some just farm equipment that the draft horses use. This is at the Nebraska Hop and Folk Festival. If any of you have attended there, you'll see the percher on here on the horse tread. The belts connected to the thrasher to thrash the wheat. This is one we have in the museum right down the hall that you can take a look at with the Hebners. You can see the flywheel right here, and that would go to the thrasher, and then the horse would stand on there. In the Hebner book, they also had an image of some cattle doing that as well. And then even sometimes dogs would operate the treadmills too. Here's a picture or a video of at the Nebraska Hop and Folk Festival. It's very short. It's a little loud. So that's a video of how they operated. I didn't have it too long. And here are some more equipment that they would have used in the field. So this is downstairs. We have the row marker. That this is a shafts, like I mentioned, the two pieces of wood that come together rather than having the single pole. You can see these two shafts that the horse would go in between. So this was to mark the rows of like planting corn or whatever. In the fields, here are a few plows that you might see downstairs. I'll show some pictures from the Fegley photos of some people using these, not these particular ones, but using plows in the fields. This is a shovel harrow to harrow the fields and kind of till up the soil. And you can see right here is like a little wheel that would travel along. The horse would get hooked up in front of here and the person would stand behind. Some more plows. This is just a different angle that I had taken a picture of that you can see. And then here's some from the Fegley photos. So this looks like a little harrow here that this woman, this isn't a draft horse, but still a good example of some of the tools that we have downstairs and how they were used. So you can see it's very similar. They have the fly nets. We have the fly nets up there to keep the flies off of the horse. It has the collar here, the hames as well, and then the bit is here and the lines are going back to this lady. You can see that she has, the horse is very well broke because the lines are kind of, they aren't tight. She has them around her neck, so trusting the horse very well. It probably did it for a long time. You can see the trace chains going down here to this single tree, which would connect it to the little harrow. Here are just some more. This is a photo that I showed earlier, but this is a person that looks like maybe cultivating the corn. And then I wanted to go over some of the delivery wagons that you might have seen or might see draft horses pull. Some of these are commercial vehicles. Some of them are more farm type vehicles. This is MG Mensters and Son coal from Ephrata, so a coal wagon that the horses could pull. This had a pole that goes outside, kind of on this side. You can see the pole is just sitting right up here on top of the wagon. So they would haul coal in the early 1900s to and from homes. These are our two pertrons again, pulling a Studebaker water wagon. This is my sister driving, and then I have my picture here as I'm driving, Cap and Tom. The Studebaker water wagons were used to wash the streets down, as you can imagine, in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Lots of horse-drawn vehicles, and with that comes lots of manure. So someone had to go and pick up the manure and wash the streets down. There are two little sprinklers that you can see down here, and that's where the water would come out. DPW stands for the Department of Public Works. So they would go around cleaning up all the horse manure. So you can see this was at the National Studebaker Convention in Dover, Delaware, a few years ago. And then an ice wagon, especially around here, ice is pretty prevalent. This one, O.W. Swinehart, comes from East Greenville. I don't know if anyone has heard of the Swineharts, but this is one that originated here in our own backyard. Whoops. You can see here's an ice scales that attach to the back and ice tongs as well. And then you can see the ice block. This is an older picture from the Along Route 100 corridor, the book, and that's from Boyertown. So not a whole lot has changed. This is a picture from Fegley collection that I came across. I just wanted to include it because it's very interesting to see how intricate and how much hard work it was to harvest the ice. So this is someone harvesting the ice on, I'm not sure where it was taken specifically, but then it would go up the elevator and then into the warehouse or the barn. And then they would deliver it during the summertime, since they didn't have refrigerators, and put it in the ice boxes. These are just some more pictures of ice wagons. Like I said, not all of them are like draft horses, but I wanted to include it because draft horses could certainly be used, and we do see lots of the same harness. And in here we see the fly nets as well. This is some milk wagons delivering milk to and from the dairies to the houses. Up above, that was at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, the Burchell Dairy Company. You might see the same wagon at the Anthracite and Heritage Center as well. They have one there. It was used from 1920 to 1950 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And then we have a few others from the Fegley photo collection and one from along Route 100 corridor. This you can definitely see as a Percheron here. It looks like a white Percheron. This one's Tom, he's a black Percheron, and lots of dairy wagons all lined up here. This is more of a commercial dairy wagon to do more of like a bulk. You can see the milk tanks on the back. This is a Price's dairy wagon, so a lot heavier built wagon, so definitely lots of draft horses would have pulled that rather than like a light horse. A few more fruits and vegetable wagons, grocery wagons were pretty common. This is a mule, Percheron mule cross. He's in the shafts, like I mentioned, so it has a piece of wood right here rather than a pole, and that would connect him to the wagon. Another wagon is butcher wagons that they would pull. This happens to be in Kutztown. I came across as I was looking up this Luckenbill butchers and came across this photograph of what it looked like on the inside of the butcher shop. Probably a little later than when they were using the wagons, but that's okay. Here's another butcher from Fleetwood, Strauss Butcher. So all these wagons, the draft horses pulled, or even some light horses, like I had mentioned. You can see some of these butcher equipment in here, like there's the scales, the saws. This might be a scale here as well as some of the other butcher tools. Now I'll briefly touch about the Conestoga wagon, because I had mentioned that earlier, and draft horses played an important role in that. Right here, this is just a team of four horses. These are Belgians. You can see there is someone riding on what we call the wheel horse, which is the horse closest to the wheel on the left side. You can see right here. And unlike, there's lots of misconceptions about Conestoga wagons and going out west, and if they were out west on the Oregon Trail, that unfortunately is a misnomer. They use prairie schooners to go out west. So Conestoga wagons were farm type wagons. They stayed on the farm or went to the larger cities, but they didn't go out west to like California. They didn't haul people. Prairie schooners did haul people. They hauled the furniture and belongings as they went out west, but Conestoga wagons only hauled freight. So in this photograph, you can see the teamster, he's riding on the horse, but no one's riding in the wagon. There's a person sitting on the lazy board, which is a board that you can pull out to control the brake. So here's the guy, he can control this brake right here of the wagon. And this is all like original harness, all leather harness with the bells, like I mentioned before. It just happens to have 4 horses rather than 6 horses. This has a feed box on the back. When they would stop at a tavern, like I mentioned, they'd have to water and feed the horses. And this feed box would connect to the pole, which is this part right up here. And then the horses could eat out of either side of the feed box. Let me show you some more. This is just a picture. I wanted to include of our mules with the bells on, so you might be able to hear the bells. And this is with like the leather harness on as well. So just a short video. This is the Conestoga team saddle that was used. That's what the teamster would have ridden on rather than riding in the wagon. Like I mentioned, we have the same one in the picture is right up here. And then this just happened to have the jerk line on, so that's why it looks a little extra in there. This is the Conestoga wagon we have downstairs. So if you're interested, you can take a peek at that as well and kind of look it over. You see that it has kind of a muslin cover or cloth on it to protect it from the weather and the elements. We see the toolbox right here. The horses would be out front, so they'd be on this side of the wagon. You can see the double trees and single trees up here. Right here is where the lazy board would be, but I didn't, when I looked earlier this week, I didn't see one on there, so it might have gotten lost somewhere along its life. And the brake we can see is right here. And here's the brake that once you pull the brake back, it can lock the wheel. And then this is the tailgate right here. So you can pull out two pins, one on either side, lift the tailgate up, load the goods like flour, sugar, tobacco. Sometimes they would even have glassware, the dry barrels, and even wet barrels from behind, and then they put it back up. So just like a kind of a truck's tailgate today, it was part of the Conestoga wagon. And since we were talking about the Conestoga wagon and draft horses, I included the Conestoga team horse. It's now extinct. It was a cross likely between an Arabian breed with a Flemish mare. Very, very light horses compared to like the Belgians today and the Percherons today. So they're definitely a lot smaller and lighter in bone. But this is a picture. You can almost see like a dish in the head. That's from the Arabian breed. And now I want to talk about other types of draft animals. We always think of the draft horses, but there are oxen. The mules are certainly important in the foundation of our history as well. So I talked briefly about what is a mule. A mule is a cross between a jack, which is a male donkey, and a mare, which is a female horse. They're sterile. They have different numbers of chromosomes, so they still have the same reproductive system as like a female or a male, but they are able to produce with one another. They're lighter in bone, mainly because of the donkey breeding and the smaller feet. They endure a little bit more than an actual horse. And the early mule classifications went on the work that they did. So like the mining mules, they were very, very tiny to go in the mines. Draft mules like Belgians and Percheron crosses of mules, sugar and cotton mules. And you can almost imagine if you can breed a donkey with a horse, you will have different sizes, variations of weights and heights. A jack, like I said, is a male donkey. A jenny or jennet is a female donkey. When you cross a stallion, a male horse with a jenny, a female donkey, you can get a hinny. And those are very small. They don't get too large. These are some pictures of one of our neighbors, an Amish neighbor. He was planting tobacco with his two Belgian mules. So included that picture. Still has all of the leather harness. So they still use the leather harness like they did in the 1800s and early 1900s. Like I mentioned earlier, I was at the Borax Visitors Center in Boron, California, and they had the 20 Mule Team Museum there, which is pretty interesting. They would haul borax through Death Valley to Mojave, where they go to the railroad. And I have included after this picture, you'll see kind of what they hauled and how many tons each of the wagon was. But it, I think, took 120 days, if I remember correctly, round trip. But you'll see the mules are kind of interesting. They're another form of draft power. These are the borax wagons, so 2 wagons of borax. The water wagon was on the back. because you can imagine how hot it was. So here, like I said, kind of just goes over the weight of each of the wagons, the costs. The costs, they were used in 1883 to 1889. And they had 36.5 tons were how much they pulled. So you can imagine there are only 20 horses and they pulled over more than what they weigh. They can also be used like pack animals. These aren't necessarily draft mules, but they could be used for pack animals as well. And then closer to home, at the National Canal Museum up in Easton, they were used to haul the canal boats and go back and forth within the canals. So I have a brief video that I took earlier this summer of the mules pulling the canal boats. So that's another form of draft that we normally don't often think about. And then even closer to home in Boyertown, I came across this photograph from the Fegley collection, or actually no, it was in Route 100 corridor, and they were plowing and tearing up the roadways to put in the trolley tracks. So these are some mules that were trying to put in the trolley tracks in Boyertown. And this also came from the National Canal Museum. I thought it was an interesting quote. It says, a horse can be dominated by man, a mule can be dominated by none. A horse succumbs to aggression, a mule succumbs to affection. A horse is indifferent to man, a mule is inquisitive to man. A horse moves, then thinks, a mule thinks, and then moves. And that's definitely true, especially as they're going down, like in the Grand Canyon, they definitely know where their footing is more than a horse would. A horse is trained by short punishment and rewards. A mule is trained by long patience and great logic. To ride a horse well, one must be proud. To ride a mule well, one must be humble. The more one understands people, the more one loves animals. The more one understands animals, the more one loves mules. So this is just kind of a cute little thing that someone wrote on the mules that they have throughout the, I guess to commemorate the canals. What? Yeah, sure, you can take a picture, that's fine. Yeah, they have a lot of different other sayings that people wrote on here, which is kind of interesting, but yeah, it's a nice quote. They're very smart. Even though mules could be stubborn, they're very smart animals. Okay, good, sure.
Lovely.
Yeah, that's fine. And another form of the draft power are oxen. These are our two oxen that we've had. Fry, he passed away a few years ago, but we have Berg still. Berg is here, right here on the right-hand side, and then Fry is here. They're a pair of oxen, and not too many people really know what oxen are. And before we got them, I didn't know either. So you aren't alone if you didn't know. Most people think they're a different species or a different breed, but they're just cattle. So these two are Jersey steers. You can have any type of cattle, like right here, these are Holsteins. Any type of cattle can be oxen. They have to be what we call non-polled, meaning they have horns, and they have to work together as a team for 4 years in order to be considered an ox. Before that, they're just like a Jersey steer that you could butcher, or Holstein steer. Yeah, they have to work together until they're 4 years old. Yeah, and they work towards like hand and voice commands. I'll show a video of them working together a little later in the PowerPoint. But unlike the horses, like I mentioned, were domesticated a really long time ago. They were bred for being worked, bred for being ridden. The cattle were bred for being like meat animals and for milk. So they aren't necessarily bred for working. So you have to really train them. Once they're young animals or young calves, you have to bottle feed them, allow them to gain your trust. These guys were bottle fed since they were calves and handled every single day and worked when they're little calves. You can see up here we have the calf yoke, which is a really tiny calf yoke that would go around their necks when they're just a few months old, to get them trained and get used to working together.
I'm sorry, so it really has nothing to do with whether they are castrated or not.
That's correct. Even some cows, yeah, even some cows can be oxen. They normally aren't because they're used for milk, but certainly it's fine to have a cow as an ox as long, like I said, as long as they have the horns and as long as they can work as a team at 4 years old.
My ignorance is showing.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't know either before we got them. I've learned a lot too. That's fine. So
We
these,
know the derivation of the word oxen.
oh, where it came from, I'll have to look it up. No, that's okay. I'll have to look up. The question was, do we know the origin of the word ox? And I said, I'm not quite sure, but I can look it up. These are, like I said, Freienberg. This is their owner, their previous owner, Dr. Darwin Braun. He's the one that raised them and gets all the credit for their training and how well they do for us. But they're very, very smart. I would say they're even smarter than horses. Like I said, they go based off of hand and voice commands. So you can use lines to drive them like you do here, or you can use a goad stick like Dr. Braun has in his hand right here. They know whoa, they know G and haul, turn left or right. You can tap them on the shoulder, you can tap them on the back to go. Normally, we've worked with them a lot and you can tell them, whoa, walk out 100 feet or 50 feet, turn around, hold up the goad stick, and they know to come right to you without saying anything. They're very smart. But yeah, they mainly look off of your hand and voice commands, and walking alongside them is the best thing and is a little easier. We've tried to line drive them, which I'll show some pictures, old photographs of people line driving them. It's a little harder. I feel like you don't have as much control over them as you do when you're standing beside them, but certainly something that can be done. These are two, I think they're red Devons from the Shelburne Museum in Massachusetts. So they still use oxen there. You can see the yoke, which is this wooden piece. And we have one downstairs. I included a picture here that you can take a look at as well. It goes around their neck. There are 2 pins that you can put in there so that way it holds it in place. And then it has this circle ring that these guys were hooked up to like a dump cart. So it was pretty light. For Freienberg, we have a chain connecting them to the pole of the wagon, but for these guys, they just put the pole right through the ring. This is a picture of my brother Andrew. You can see he has a goad stick in his hand. He has that up as he's leading them. This was at a local museum in New Holland that we took them to. They're pulling just a little Conestoga wagon. And you'll notice Berg, he's the one closest to us. He wasn't paying attention, so he's lags behind in the beginning. But you could just walk right beside them. Andrew doesn't really need the lead rope, but since we were out in public, we put the lead rope on them. But they're also pulling from their necks and the shoulders. So they do pretty well. And then here's the ox tooth, like I mentioned, that's downstairs that you can take a look at. You can see the yoke part is here. These are the keys that you'll put in the hole at the top to keep it in place. And then the ring that you can put the pole through. Some cowbells that I included as well that you can see in the collection. Ox did have shoes as well. We don't have any ox shoes here, but we have some horseshoes that you can take a look at. We also have right here is just a single ox yoke just for one ox. And then these are ox hames, very similar to the horse hames. They're a little different, but they're more padded. They're a little bit more rare than the horse hames, but I'll show an older photograph from the Fegley collection that you'll see the hames being used. So they were definitely used. That would be more so if you're line driving them, you can put the hames around their neck. This, I just included a photograph because I came across both of the horsepower as well as the oxen, both pulling the same hay ladder. So it's kind of interesting to see you can use both for the same purpose. And this, like I mentioned about the line driving them, they were hooked to the shafts, pulling this cart. This is from the Route 100 corridor book. Some more photographs of them pulling like a dump cart. Like I mentioned, it goes in this ring attached to their yoke. You can see it here. So I'm not quite sure what they were doing in the field, but it looks like a cornfield. And then here is the harness for the harness for the ox as well. This one doesn't look like, it looks like it's pulled. It doesn't look like it has any horns. So that might be the reason why they're using the harness rather than the ox yoke. Because once he puts his head down, the yoke would just fall right over if he didn't have any horns. And this one's a picture that I really like too from the Fegley photos of, this looks like it's unlike the Hames there, it looks like it has an actual collar that around, like a horse collar that went around. And I'm sure they had some adaptations too, depending on the ox. And this one doesn't have any horns on either. This one you can see does have horns. Yeah, I did notice that they were upside down. You can see this would normally point up, but I think it's just because of them using the oxen rather than the horses. And then I just included this for the Boyertown Transportation Museum because you can have goats that pull wagons too. We always think of the large animals like the horses and draft horses, but certainly there's some goats that can pull the wagons, like deliver groceries or whatever. And then this is the last slide. So you can open it up to any questions, or if you have like any experiences of working with draft horses, you can feel free to share those. This is a book that I came across at an Amish auction, and it just says Petersham Motors, and the Amishman says, Elam, with gas prices heading towards $2 a gallon, you're beginning to make GM sweat. And it has some of the Amish buggies, so just a little comic relief at the end. Are there any questions or any experiences? Yes, in the back. To like hook a harness? Sure. So the question was for the people that are on Zoom is how long would it take to harness and hitch a horse? So the long answer to the question, or the short answer I should say, is it really depends on the person and it depends on how many horses you're hooking. So just for one horse, probably about like 15 minutes. It could even be less than that. Like if you go to the farm show and the horses, they have to quickly hitch them or quickly hook them up to get them ready for the next class going around the horseshoe or horse arena. It can be pretty quick, but just for like safety concern, it takes us probably about 15 minutes for the horse, making sure everything's fit on there. We always double and triple check ourselves to make sure everything's hooked properly. For a larger 6-horse team, it takes a while. I don't know how long it would take the Budweisers to do it, but they have, or Budweiser hitch, but they have lots of people to help them. But that's a good question. Yeah, it just depends. Yeah, and in the back.
My dad actually farmed when he farmed when he was younger, actually with horses.
Yeah.
And he always told us a story. It was sad because he had a team of horses for plowing. And one was used for plowing, but the one he bought was a dairy horse that pulled the wagon. It was a lot easier. And then sadly, what happened, it died right in the trench. Because trying to keep up with the other horse that was used to it. And my dad said he was crying for days, you know, from that difference.
I can believe it.
But I have questions for you too. You can see how a team of working on this, they try working it, but when you have multiple rows of the teams, I don't know if the pull is averaged out amongst all of them.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so it's not just the lead horse that has, like, if you have like 4 horses or 6 horses, it's not just the ones on the front or even the ones on the back that have most of the weight, because like I mentioned, they have the spreader kind of evening it out and all of them are pulling at once. if one horse lags behind, like the wheel horse closest to the wheel, then the other ones do have more weight on them. So if one's lagging behind, the other horses can kind of tell that, and even the driver can tell it as well, and they might have to use a whip to get the horse to go or keep it up the pace. When you brake, like with the Conestoga wagons, when you put the brake on, the ones closest to the wheel when you're going down like a hill will probably have to hold back more weight than the ones in the front.
I assume that the horses they probably would train themselves like that. They know they should pull some average amount each, you know.
Yep, yeah, exactly. Even like the oxen with that video, Burr kind of lagged behind. Fry was pulling the whole wagon himself, and then he realized, so he had to go along as well. But yeah, thank you for sharing the experiences. And even like today, we see like the hitches that are used to pulling like the really light wagons, like training for the farm show, and then they get sold for like Amish use, and they aren't used to working as hard. So it can be a little bit of an adaptation for sure. Any other questions or experience? Yes.
How long does it take to get a horse acclimated to that setup? I mean, they're not kicking or jostling around. They're pretty focused on the job.
Yes.
And how do you do that? Get them ready for
Yeah,
that position?
that's a good question. So the question was how do you get them acclimated to like the harness and pulling, and how long does that take? And the answer to that, I would say it also kind of depends. Most of the horses of the hitches, they're being bred and raised to go into the hitches. So they're starting when they're foals, getting them used to the halter braking. When they're about a year or two, then they put the harness on and get them used to that as well. Probably the most broke ones are probably the Amish mules and the draft horses that are having to pull, like really pull a load. Because when it's time to stop, they're very tired and they stop right away, and they aren't kicking as well or as some other horses, but it does take a long time for sure. So normally around 2 years of age, you get them used to everything. That's a good question. Yes, at the back.
What determines the number of mules that they use for the 20 mule team hauling boarders? Do you have?
I'm not sure. I think it was just based on the weight. So they knew that the 20 mule team, like 20 mules could pull that amount of weight. And they did have some that they would have like back at the Boron facility, and even in the Mojave Desert when they got to the railroad, if they did have to switch them out. But I think they just figured that was sufficient to carry the borax through the desert. I'm not sure where they came up with the number 20, if it was just like they thought that was sufficient, or if they might have had more, like 22 or 24. Yep. Yeah, it is. They had to go in a straight line. There's a video of them, like when they turn, the first 10, they turn, and then they have to jump over the spreader. So the chain, they have to jump over the chain. So one team's on one side of the spreader, the other team's on the other side, and they turn them that way. So it is hard to turn them. Thankfully, through the desert, there aren't too many turns. But it is, yeah, it's interesting. Yes, in the back.
Just to add on to that, gentleman over there, I was looking up on the internet here. The street that we have 20 mules in Borax laundry.
Yeah. It's interesting for sure. When I went to the board facility, they're still mining for boron up in, it's called literally boron, California, like the element boron. They're still mining for borax. They do use it in the laundry detergents. They use it in cell phones. The byproduct, I think, of boron is lithium. So they're trying to find another source of using lithium for other equipment. But yeah, they use it in a lot of different fertilizers. They'll use boron in. A lot of different products have boron in it. But I think that's probably what most people are familiar with. Like growing up, you might have seen the box with the 20 mule team for the borax on the laundry detergent. Any other questions? Did you have a question earlier?
too.
Oh, that's-
I'm interested in the derivation of certain words.
oh,
Some call them punch. Have you
Oh.
ever heard that?
no, I haven't.
Okay, thank you. And then what is a mule with snap?
With what?
Snap. SNAP.
A mule with snap.
That's an Amish descriptive, which is.
It was I guess they were saying, the question was, what is a mule with snap?
Right.
And I'm not quite sure exactly. I haven't heard that term.
That means that mule is almost uncontrolled.
Oh, my God.
The definition is that the mule is
Thank you
uncontrollable.
very much. I gotta get it down.
It's another term called the smooth mouth mule. That means he can be 10 years old or 30 years old. So it's ambiguous. That's how they sell their livestock. You know what I'm saying? Like we registered stock, we say it is worth before this time, or on April 1st, 1996. Whatever date that is to be done, that means that's how old it is. But they don't do that. They don't keep records. That's Conestoga team horse. They didn't keep that record. They were like 957 horse.
Mhm.
And they have some very similar to that today. They still have Conestoga team. Well, we don't have Conestoga team horse today. We have a horse that's just like that, but we don't call it Conestoga team horse. Why? We don't use it for Conestoga wagons anymore. We're using it for farm.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. Sorry that I don't have all the derivatives of the words.
Cleared things up for me enormously.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or experiences? Yes.
Well, this isn't a question exactly, but I live near the Perkiomen trails. back-
Oh, yeah.
So I see horses a lot.
Mhm.
Lately, it seems in these last few years, I see people riding mules.
Mhm.
Is that becoming more of a thing in the?
This necessarily or not. Lots of people like the Amish mules, are definitely more hardy for sure. I don't know if it's more of like they just like having the aesthetics of the mules, or if it's just, yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, mules are very popular. If you go to like any type of a farm sale or horse sale, especially in Lancaster, mules do bring a lot of money. So they are definitely have, like I said, a little bit more harder working and hardier than horses. So I don't know why they would just have mules, but that's interesting. I'm glad. Yeah, I'd like to see them. Let's see. Yes, you have a question in the back.
So why do they have the bell?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't talk about that. So the Conestoga team.
What was the question?
Oh, thank you. The question is, why do they have the bells? On the Conestoga horses or Conestoga team horses? And the answer to the question is that way. Normally, when back in the late 1800s and 1700s, the roads were very narrow. So they have the bells to alert the other team of when another team is coming. So you would be able to hear them coming from afar. They'd be able to pull over and then the other team would pass. So they have the bells on that way. They could hear the team coming. And you might have also heard like, come home with your bells on. That basically means have a safe trip. So if they broke a wheel or needed help and another teamster came by, instead of using money for payment, they would hand over a rack of bells as payment. So if you had all the bells on, then you had a safe trip. If you didn't, then you had something that didn't go so well along the way. So they said, come home with your bells on was like the expression that sometimes they use. Yeah. Yes, in the back.
Is that generally the same throughout the world then? Nothing unique in the United States?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so I'd say generally they have the same like harness and collars as most parts of the world. Certainly you might see like in the Budweiser, their collars and hames are very like pronounced, like it kind of comes up and very like ornate. So you might see a little bit more of that, but they still serve the same function. That's a good question. So the question I forgot to ask or say was if the harness and the collars are the same around the world. And I think there might be a question on the Zoom. Oh, it just says, will this be available to view later on? And yes, if anyone would like a copy of my presentation, just let me know and I can send it to you or share it with you. Yeah.